Welcome to AngularUP. I'm so excited that I get to be here to share Cypress with you. The slides and the code are online right now. You can go to robrich.org. Here on robrich.org, click on presentations, and here's Gaining Confidence with Cyprus Tests. Here's the slides, here's the code. The code is up on GitHub. It is there right now. I've been that guy chasing the speaker to try and get the content for a slide, and I don't like it either, which is why this code is available right now. While you're here, click on About Me, and you'll get to some of the things that I've done recently. I'm a Microsoft MVP and a friend of Redgate. AZ GiveCamp is really cool. AZ GiveCamp brings volunteer developers together with charities who otherwise couldn't afford software services. We start building software for them Friday after work. Sunday afternoon, we deliver completed software back to the charities. If you're in Phoenix, come join us for the next AZ GiveCamp. Or if you'd like to see a GiveCamp in your neighborhood, hit me up on email or Twitter, and let's get philanthropy installed where you live too. Some of the other things that I've done, I worked on the Gulp team as a core contributor on version 2 and version 3. That was a lot of fun. And one of the things I'm particularly proud of is I replied to a .NET Rocks podcast episode. They read my comment on the air, and they sent me a mug. Woohoo! So that's my claim to fame, is my .NET Rocks mug. So Cyprus Tests. Let's talk about Cypress. Well, first, I want to quick do a test of my website. So I'm just going to come in here and I'm going to run these tests and see how it goes. Now, in this case, this app is to do MVC, and I've written a few tests that will kind of flex all of the things: creating a to-do, deleting a to-do, filtering by to-dos. Oh, look, all my tests passed. That was really fast. That was cool. So I love how quickly Cypress is able to do the tests. But like any good story, we kind of started in the middle. Cypress is browser-based functional tests. We can think of it as end-to-end tests, and that's the term that Cypress likes to use, end-to-end tests. Cypress is two things. It's an Electron app, and it's a browser plugin. It's built on top of Mocha and Chai, although that's more or less hidden from us, which is really cool. But we have a really, really good story there. So like any good story, we kind of started in the middle. Let's back up and take a look at testing as a whole. When we look at browser testing, there's lots of different things that we can do. We can test from here down. That's an end-to-end test, where we'll start at the browser and we'll hit our API and we'll hit our middle tier, and we might wander through lots of microservices and finally end up at the database. That's end-to-end tests. We're validating that all the pieces work well together. Test this API. We may fire requests either at our REST endpoint or GraphQL endpoint and validate that it returns the correct response. We may test this service. And at that point, it's a code service where we're just kind of flexing the functions and understanding how that service works. In this case, there isn't any UI component, so we don't need to automate any user interactions. It's just about flexing code, unit tests. We might test this component. Now, the cool part here about components is that components might have child components. They might be children of other components. So we may choose to mock these dependencies. Maybe we're mocking network requests, or maybe we're mocking child components. Maybe we're setting these into a test framework so that we can manipulate these components in very known and predictable ways. We can also test that it works in this browser. Now that we have HTML5 and browsers are much better at being consistent in things, this is less important. But does it break in Safari, or does it break in Internet Explorer? Here's where it's kind of nice to run the tests in various browsers to get a feel for how it works. So with each of these tests, we'll probably use different tools to accomplish this. If we're unit testing a service, then we may use Mocha with Chai, or we may use Jest. This allows us to get maximum impact on our code, and maybe we're mocking out a few things, but we're doing direct testing. If we're testing services in a browser, we might use Karma. Now, the cool thing about Karma is it's not doing any user interactions. It's only running the Mocha or Jest tests, but it's running them in each headless browser. That's really helpful in understanding if the JavaScript code has irregular behaviors in some browsers. We're still not testing the user experience. We're just testing our functions. When we do component unit tests, we might use test utils. Test utils has variants for Angular, React, and Vue that allows us to create a mock hosting environment for components. We can mount our component in this fake environment. We may choose to mock or create all of our child components, and then we can flex our web component in different ways to understand how it behaves. Test utils is a really, really elegant mechanism. API tests. In this case, we can just fire requests at an API using Supertest. If we set all the headers and the body correctly, we can validate that the response is as we expect. We don't need any user interaction here. We just fire requests at an API. End-to-end tests. Here's where we could use Selenium or Cypress or Test Cafe or Playwright. As you grab these slides from robrich.org, all of these blue links are links that you can click on to get to each package. Well, let's dig in a little bit with end-to-end tests. When we look at end-to-end tests, the one that we usually default to is Selenium. Selenium is interesting in that it kind of remote controls the browser process. WebDriver is more or less a standard that's baked into most browsers. And so if we have a WebDriver experience, then we may be able to remote drive lots of browsers. Selenium has SDKs in lots of languages. You can write your tests in JavaScript or in Ruby or in C# or in Python. And in fact, some browsers have plugins that allow you to record Selenium tests. They're usually not great tests, but it can allow you to record and play. So if you're looking for maximum compatibility, Selenium might be a good choice. On the downside, because Selenium is only remote controlling the browser, there's a lot of places where things can go wrong. I need to wait a lot for browsers to finish rendering or for controls to be visible or all of these things. Selenium has no idea if it's coming. It just needs to wait longer. So a lot of times in our tests, if we get a faulty test or a failing test in Selenium, we just up all of our wait times, which means that our tests take a lot longer. Cypress. By comparison, Cypress is a browser plugin. And because it's a browser plugin, we can do much more integrated experiences with our tests. We can take a look at browser events, and we can wait as long as we need to until that browser event finishes. And then exactly when it finishes, trigger the next piece in our test. We don't have to wait a second and check again. We can wait until the browser DOM loads. Cypress is really good at being able to integrate deeply into the browser to get great experiences. But because it integrates deeply, it's only compatible with the browsers whose plugins they've already built. Cypress has a really great Electron IDE that we're going to take a look at in a minute, where you can take a look at each of your tests. You can validate it in various browsers. Cypress is a really, really great experience compared to command line tools like Selenium. One of the things that's particularly cool about Cypress is it can take videos of each of the tests so that if anything goes wrong, you can debug it with the IDE, or you can watch it fail with the video to know exactly what did bad things. The biggest downside to Cypress is that they don't support Safari yet. It's coming. They support Chromium-based browsers and Firefox, but they don't support Safari. Next up, Test Cafe. Test Cafe is a browser plugin built by DevExpress. So if you use other DevExpress components, then you may be right at home with Test Cafe. Like Cypress, tests are written in JavaScript. It uses CSS selectors where Cypress uses kind of a jQuery syntax, so it might be a little bit more familiar there. But it uses its own assertions where the rest of them use Mocha or Chai or Jest. So the assertions in Test Cafe are a little weird. Test Cafe doesn't actually run in the browser. It runs in Node, and it just kind of asserts the browser process. So you'll spend a lot of time in Test Cafe marshalling back and forth between the test and the browser. Test Cafe has great browser support, though, so you can use it in every browser that you're looking for. Next up, Playwright. Playwright is the new kid on the block. Playwright was built by Microsoft, the same people who built Puppeteer. What's really cool about Playwright is, as it was built by the Puppeteer authors, it feels a lot like Puppeteer. On the upside, if you're familiar with Puppeteer, you'll be right at home with Playwright. On the downside, it's more of a browser automation tool. It feels like the assertion mechanism was kind of bolted on later. So if you're familiar with Puppeteer, then Playwright might be a good choice. Unlike Cypress and Test Cafe, Playwright has support for JavaScript, TypeScript, Python, C#, and Go. And so you can create tests in your language of choice with Playwright. It's pretty cool. Playwright also has this mechanism where the tests run in Node, and so you'll spend a lot of time marshalling data back and forth between the test and the browser. Not that unlike what you do with, well, Puppeteer. So when we look at each of these testing tools, we understand kind of when we might use each of them. If I'm doing API tests, I'll definitely use Supertest. If I'm doing end-to-end tests, Cypress is a good choice. If I'm doing unit tests, I'll use test utils with my components, or I'll just use Mocha or Jest directly. So how do we get started with Cypress? Well, the cool part is we npm install Cypress, and we then do Cypress open. When we get Cypress open, it will scaffold lots of tests for us, and that's really, really cool. Just popping it open, it'll notice that it doesn't have any stuff, and it'll build out a Cypress folder with a kitchen sink of tests. So I've got the Cypress IDE open here, and here's all those example tests that it created for me. That's really cool. I can pick a particular test, and I can choose to open it in the IDE. I could also choose to run all the tests straight away, and that's really cool. And I can choose which browser I want to run it in. The Electron browser is built in. That's the Chromium-based browser. It's also discovered that Edge, Firefox, and Chrome exist on my machine, and it can run the tests in each of those browsers as well. Once I've chosen my browser, I can identify a test, and I can fire up that test and run each of the pieces. Now, in this case, I'm writing my tests in TypeScript. So the first thing it's going to do is compile the TypeScript. Cypress then notices that the file's changed, and it restarts my tests. So here's my test running inside the browser, and it's going to go running inside Chrome. It's going to go run my tests in this browser. Now, the cool thing is because it's deeply integrated into the browser, then it doesn't need to wait for things. There is no, sleep 2 seconds type of experience. It will do exactly what it needs to. That's really cool. Now, with each of these tests, I can look at the particular stages of that test, and I can wander through the pieces. What is the item that it found when it was here? It found exactly there. And it's actually showing me the element that it picked. Okay, so then it needs to type. Where is it going to type? Well, it clicked right here in the middle so that it could gain focus on that control. It typed some content and pushed return, and then went to go look for the thing that it was running with. So we can walk through each of these tests. And what's really cool, because this is a browser, inspect, and we can get at the Chrome console and see all of the particulars at this step. So here's the console output that was at this step. And here's the console output that was at this step. I think this IDE is really slick for being able to do the things that we need to do. So there's the Cypress IDE. Running all tests is really fun. If we have a minute, let's definitely do that. But let's jump back in here. Not there. That'll learn me. Okay, so let's look at a Cypress app together with TypeScript. Now, the cool thing is if I just npx Cypress open, it will put in a bunch of JavaScript files that will allow me to do all the things. But here in the application that we've got up on GitHub, I've done it in TypeScript. So I did the Cypress open, and it created the Cypress folder, but I chose to move that Cypress folder into this test Cypress folder. So in a TypeScript project, we have the tsconfig, and this tsconfig will be specific to my Angular app or the other Spa app that I have ready to go. And this tsconfig just defines the details of my application. The first step in Cypress is cypress.json. Cypress.json tells me where the plugins file is. In this case, I chose to put it in test Cypress plugins index.ts. Here in that Cypress folder, I have a ts config that allows all of the Cypress details to be in TypeScript. Now I chose to extend it from that base ts config, which is perfect, and then I just override it with the particulars that is specific to Cypress. You can grab this code up on GitHub and continue to fork this or leverage it. So that plugins file, plugins index.ts, this file was for the most part scaffolded for me. And here I just identify the folders where I want everything else to be. Now, in this case, I chose to make my fixtures folder in test Cypress fixtures, my integration folder in test Cypress integration. You may choose to call it spec or tests. My screenshots folder, I'll put it in a results folder. Same thing with my videos, I'll put those in a results folder. And then the support file is here in support/index.ts. Inside support index.ts, I may choose to define commands, and we'll come back to commands, but these are things that I might choose to use in my Cypress test. So let's dig into some of the tests. Here's that to-do MVC.spec. Now I'm choosing to run a bunch of samples from to-do MVC. To-do MVC is a really cool site in that allows us to flex a bunch of different client-side JavaScript frameworks. Now, the cool thing about this project is that each of them use a standard set of CSS and HTML. So we can do assertions and selections in a really generic way. That's cool. So I have a few here, and if I choose to uncomment this one and comment this one, it will actually run it on a different framework. That's cool. I'm going to go grab the site name just so that my describe block tells me which site I'm running. That's kind of nice. And then before each visit, I'm going to go run that site URL. Now this just keeps me from needing to run this test, run this browse to at the beginning of each test, but I definitely could. If I wanted to, I could grab this out of here, and in my act step, I could visit that site as well. So our first hello world test, let's take Cypress for a spin. I'm going to go visit that site. And once that page loads, I'm going to say sci.url, go grab the URL of this page, and it should equal the site. I should be on the site that I expect. We can see this kind of jQuery chaining type syntax where I do things and then I .should, and then I can pass in a comparison and it will do the comparison. I could also create mechanisms in Mocha directly or in Chai, but this Cypress type of experience is really great. So next up, let's create another test. Now in this case, I'm going to go grab the to-do list, and I'm going to go grab all of the list items in it, and it should not exist. Now, depending on how my framework implemented it, they may be hidden. So maybe this is a smidge fragile, but this is a great way to say, let me go select a thing and do an assertion on it. Cool. Now let's start to interact with it. As we start leveling up in Cypress, we can do interesting things. Now I'm going to go get this .new to do element, and I'm going to type in it this new to do. Now this new to do comes from this variable here, and then I have this magic word enter. I can do other commands like mouse arrow up, shift, control. All of the function keys that I can start to think of may have hotkeys that I can do this way. I could also, just embed content in the string. So I'm going to go grab that new to do, and I'm going to type in it and finally push enter. Once I push enter, that submits the new to do, and it'll do all of the processing in my SPA. Next up, I'm going to go look for the to-do list, the items, and it should contain this text. That says to me, hey, once I finish creating this to-do item, I should have that to-do item in the to-do list, and then let's go look at the new to-do, and it should have a value of blank. So after I've created a new to-do, the to-do is in the list, and the entry box is empty now. Leveling up again should mark a to-do completed. So now I need to go create a to-do and then check the completed box on that. Let's go create a new to-do. We'll type some irrelevant stuff just so that we make sure that we complete the correct to-do. Then we'll type new to-do and create that one. Now this view, this is a piece inside the DOM that wraps each to-do, and I'm going to filter by that new to-do. Now this is a little bit awkward. If I come in here to my test class, I can see that it has a view class and then it has content in it. It might be better for me to alter that CSS to create a specific property that I can hook into. In this case, just kind of going after a generic property can be fragile, especially because I'm going after text inside that. Well, what if marketing chooses to change the messaging on the site, or engineers choose to change the structure of that? Is it called .view anymore? We might want to craft specific attributes that allow us to do interesting things. It might be better, rather than contains this, to do something like .get and pass in a very specific data-cy equals my item. If I can get that kind of specific selector here, then I can get a whole lot more durable tests. Okay, so I've got the item, and now I'm going to go find that toggle button, and I'm going to click it. Now that I've clicked it, I've marked this as completed. Once it's completed, I can go look for that to do again. Again, I wish there was a gentler way to select this if we had named them better, but it should have this class of completed. That completed is that strike through class, which is really cool. Should delete a to-do. Well, let's go create some to-dos. Let's click the destroy button. Now, in this case, the destroy button is only visible if we hover. Now, hovering over that component is interesting, but that's not a feature that Cypress supports. Cypress will run all of the JavaScript associated with the mouse events and things like that, but it may not run the CSS associated with those mouse events. So in this case, I'm going to say force is true. Now I'm going to force it because it wasn't visible when I clicked it, but I clicked it anyway. Now that's cool. I've clicked destroy. So now let me go look at the list. It should only have one item, this irrelevant item, and it should contain irrelevant. So make sure that I clicked on the right one, not the wrong one. That was a great test in being able to validate things and take a look at when I might need to step outside the normal pieces, like force is true. Well, I'm getting to the point where I'm doing a lot of redundant creating the task thing. And well, that's kind of redundant. I'm going to do new to do, and I'm going to type. That isn't super descriptive of what's happening. Well, let's say to do add. I'm going to pass in some text that I want for that to do, and let's just make to do add a thing. Let's step into commands and talk about exactly that command. I can come in here to Cypress commands.add, and I can give it a name. In my case, to do add. I'm going to pass in some text that is a string. I'm going to type that thing in and press enter, and then I'll validate that the text in that enter box is now blank. Now, this was really good in being able to describe functionality that I wanted in my application, and it makes my tests a lot more legible. To do add. I'm adding 3 to-dos. That's perfect. To do complete. I want to go click that completed button. Step over here in commands as well, and here's commands.add to do complete. I'm going to go do all of that mayhem. As I'm reading my test now, it's much more terse. It's much more descriptive because I've named the things that I'm doing. If we can create mechanisms, reusable pieces that abstract the features, then commands can be really powerful. Now we are here in TypeScript, so how do we tell TypeScript that to do add is a thing? Well, I'm going to come in here to commands.d.ts, and I'm going to define those 2 methods here on my component, or on Cypress Chainable. Now, once I've defined them, TypeScript is completely happy. And now I have much more descriptive tests. That's great. Show only completed tasks. Well, I'm going to add a bunch of things. I'm going to complete it. And then I'm going to go find some filters to check on things. Well, this is really cool. I now have another suite of tests here. Let me open up Cypress, and a spiritual successor to do MVC is the Hacker News PWA. So I have some tests around Hacker News PWA. Now, these things are going to run against the various Hacker News PWAs. And so pulling open the hnpwa.spec, we can also specify which Hacker News PWAs we want to flex. Similar type of experience. Let's go light those up, and some hello worlds that do that. We should have a length of 30. Now, that is an assumption. Part of running this test is that it will return the data that it needs in this site. So should visit page. By the end of the page, I should have, well, in this case, the page didn't finish loading. I didn't wait long enough. In this case, the page was loading and eventually it finished, but I gave up before then. Now, here's an example where we may want to start mocking data. This data didn't show up fast enough, and we really wanted to be able to collect our data ourselves. So here, we're going to have a test that will inject some fake data. So when it goes to grab the data, we're actually going to return our own data set and then assert the data on that data set. Here in this final test, we're going to do exactly that. cy.intercept. If it matches this regular expression, we could also just pass a string. Then I would like you to reply with this Hacker News fixture. Now, this Hacker News fixture is just all of the results that I want to bind into this page. Now, because I have a consistent set of results, I can come back in here and I can look for exactly the title that I expect. I couldn't do this test if I was just pulling up random data off of the API because, well, every day's top news story is different. That's perfect. So we were able to take a look at both to do MVC and the Hacker News PWA, and we saw some best practices start to emerge. When we're looking at this, we could search by the text within it. That gets really fragile, especially if we change the messaging. We could look for specific IDs or classes. Better, but if we reorganize our site and nest things differently, that may fall down. Even better, let's create a data.cy element and describe that specific element. Now we can go search for that specific element, and we know we'll get exactly there. Now, the cool part about getting exactly there is that we know that we have the environment, the exact DOM element that we need, and we know that this was self-documenting. We're not going to style this differently and end up changing it out from under ourselves or happen to rename the content that this matches. This specifically documents that this is an attribute for Cypress. That's great. And now we might have a production thing that could strip them out, or we could start to run these functional tests in production as well. Another great best practice, create commands for frequent tasks. We created a command to create a new to-do. And by doing that, we now had a function that was very descriptive in the types of activities that we wanted to do. That command allowed us to make our tests more terse and more self-describing because we're calling functions specific to our application domain. As you grab these slides from roberts.org, click through here and read the docs about commands. Another one, as we looked at Hacker News, we couldn't assert against live data because we didn't know what that live data needed to be. So creating a Cypress Intercept allowed us to mock in the data that we needed. Now, this is wonderful in being able to assert the things that we needed in this test, but it was also a little dangerous. We assume that our fixture exactly matches the results of our API. So we should have some tests that mock out the results and some tests that don't. The goal is end-to-end tests. And if we mock out the other end, then we're not really validating the end-to-end experience. But in places where we want to validate specific details of components, then we do want to mock out that back end so that we know that we have a really consistent and known experience. We used fixtures to be able to mock out that data for Hacker News. We can use fixtures in other places where we need lots of unique data. In places where we have a big JSON blob or a binary blob, move those to fixtures to avoid cluttering the test. That will ensure that the test is more terse, more legible, and because we've given a fixture a specific name, now we understand when to use this fixture because, well, its name describes its function. Mock APIs to unit test the UI. We can't assert today's headline, but we can validate the headline on a known experience. So Cypress is a really, really great mechanism for doing in-browser testing, end-to-end testing, and allows for some interesting mocking experiences. It's definitely not the only tool that you'll need to be able to validate all the pieces in your test. You'll want to use test utils for mocking components, and you'll want to use Karma to be able to run unit test on specific functions outside of visual components. But Cypress is a really, really great experience to be able to drive the visual components inside of our application. If you're watching this later on video, you can tweet me at rob_rich with any questions or thoughts on this presentation. But for those who are here live, what are our questions?